really glad you're here for this workshop. How we're going to do this is, this section is going to give you a lot of technical information that I hope is going to give you freedom to take on these subjects that have perhaps felt intimidating or you've passed over. And the one thing I really would like you to watch for, even though we're using vehicles as a subject, I will demo a car for you. These concepts are going to help you even in a still life where you have ellipses or a building or your perspective. So this isn't just cars. So really keep tuned in and say, this information is going to really bring up the level and perhaps help you when you have a beautiful painting that perhaps got spoiled by some little technical error. I'm hoping that we can get you over that hump, take care of those things, and have you end with more successful paintings. We're now going to start with composition. Why am I going to choose to paint this? I'm going to say car, because that's what I'm using for an example. And rather than just copying, I would like to help you turn from a copier to a creator, so that you come upon a scene, perhaps it's a tractor in a barn, rather than just, I'm now going to copy what's out there. I'm going to teach you how to have permission to perhaps make it into more of a story or to move something. You can actually, the wonder of being painters, we can pick this tractor up and move it with our paintbrush. And for you to do that, I've brought some examples of paintings that have vehicles as subject matter that I've done. Some are studio, some are plein air, but to show that sometimes it's the main actor. Here, they're supporting actors. I have down here a wheelbarrow. And the concepts that I'm going to teach you, you need even for something as simple as a wheelbarrow, those ellipses, the perspective. So I want you to think about intent. Do I want this to be a story? Do I want it at night? Do I want it to do a nocturne? Is it a city scene? Here's the beauty of it. Let's say you want to paint a cityscape and you love doing buildings and there's a vehicle coming and you go, that's really complicated and I'm afraid to do that. So suddenly you've painted a beautiful cityscape with nobody in the streets and it's empty and you've lost the story. So decide on a bit of a story, why the vehicle's there. And again, it's really wonderful. You make a choice. This is the main actor or it's a supporting actor. And that way you're going to keep a nice balance. And when you're painting, actually the balance that you often want to keep is an imbalance. In other words, you want something obviously large and something obviously smaller. If you get things too balanced, then you've lost impact. And it's the same when you're doing something like this. If you have a play that you've gone to see, and there's 6 actors, and they all are the same height, and they all have the same importance in the story and the same amount of lines, it's not going to be as interesting. So decide, main actor or supporting actor. I want to particularly point out one of these paintings that I've brought for you, and that's this small blue truck that was sitting by the Colorado River. This was a plein air piece down near Moab, and I brought it. It's a very simple painting, but it may have been my first ever plein air painting, and I brought it to encourage you because I was attracted to it. I desperately wanted to paint it, and I also was hugely intimidated. And it was going badly. And I stopped and I reminded myself, I went, wait, Lyn, you know how to draw, you know how to paint. It's just shapes and measurements, darks and lights. And there was something about the fact that vehicles are a little bit complex that I wasn't being paralyzed by inability. I was being paralyzed by the intimidation that vehicles and their complexity can make you feel. And that happened to me. So when I had a woman call me up and say, I saw this fabulous tractor, and I really, really wanted to paint it, and I was just too scared. And that's the kind of thing that I want to help solve. So what I did is if this happens to you, remind yourself, say, I know how to draw, I know how to take measurements, there's dark shapes and light. Forget that it's a vehicle, step by step, and if you need to. And what I did is I sat down and sort of said, why am I so frightened? It's just shapes. And then I took a few measurements. I actually held up my paintbrush, used tools if you need to, and went, oh, I have the proportions now. And I patiently stepped my way through and came up with a nice little painting. So just expect that unless you have painted a lot of different types of vehicles and things that have structure, that may likely happen to you too the first few times, where you get that little stage, it's like a bit of stage fright, painter's stage fright of facing this thing, and you will get beyond it. And so don't let it bother you. Just go, oh, this is what Lyn told me, this is going to happen. Got a little nervous here, take the measurements, step slowly through it, and you're going to come up with a very nice painting at the end. We've talked a little bit about picking your subject, and I have some new examples for you. And what I want to do here is circle back to when I said, I'd like to help you become a creator instead of a copier. So I picked this beautiful car, and I decided I want to say something with this car. I want to create a painting. And it was wonderful because the issue was the museum they rolled this car out of, there was no way to paint it. In other words, had I been a copier, the painting would have ended up like this, which is very awkward. And the temptation is just either to take a picture, go back to the studio and copy what's there, or if you're painting en plein air, sit down and copy what's there. But the way it was parked, I'm like, this isn't much of a story. It's not very attractive compositionally. And so I had complete freedom to look to my left, and there was the beautiful entrance to this grand old hotel. And I felt very free to sit in front of the car like this and paint, and then look to my left and paint what was there and combine the two. So I want to teach you sort of a cut and paste mentality. In other words, the scene around you, you take those ingredients and then create something that tells the story that you want to tell. For the example I'm going to paint for you, and the one that you can hopefully perhaps paint along to practice perhaps your first vehicle or your 100th vehicle, I will do for the demo this painting here, which is a straight-on painting. It's a little more symmetrical. It's a little less complex. But it's also a view that I often choose because many of the details of vehicles are really beautiful and elegant by looking right toward the grille. I want to show you here, I've got my model. I actually found a nice little model that's similar to the Cadillac that I'll be painting for you. And this is something that I want you to think about when you compose, perhaps after you paint along with the demo, when you go out to compose your first painting of a vehicle, is it's going to have especially with vehicles, the viewpoint, whether it's low, mid, high, is going to truly affect the story, the feeling, and the mood. And what I did while I was there taking photos for you is I took some radically different ones to explain so you could see the difference. If I was going to paint this Cadillac, in fact, when you hear Dave's wonderful song that he has written for our video, you'll get an emotive feeling from it. And we're used to that in music and song, and we expect it. But we forget that we can put that in our paintings and our compositions too. If I was painting a painting of this Cadillac, and the story I was telling was perhaps a bootlegger in Harlan County, back in the 30s, and I wanted that kind of gritty feeling, I would come up under the car like this painting. So I get some drama and some action. And even though it's two-dimensional and still, you're going to get a feeling of movement. Certainly, this I would not pick to give that kind of feeling like, yes, they're running from the revenue man. It has nothing to do with that. This I'd be getting there. So I'm aware of this. I know why I have picked a viewpoint. This viewpoint here is actually, it's a 3/4 view. It's actually a little difficult to paint unless you really do take some measurements. And it's often used by automakers. It actually is called the beauty shot. They'll do a 3/4 down the side. And it's a pretty shot, but it's a little bit neutral emotionally. You would have to, if you're trying to tell a story, you'd have to give some hints in the rest of the painting about what story, and it has less movement, what story you're trying to tell. Also, the challenge here was, had I copied it, is the way they display this car. If you look at this painting, or photograph, I'm sorry, this was on an angled ramp. And so it's askew. So I had to correct that. So you're going to make a plan, tell your story, choose your viewpoint, and then if there's some corrections that need to be made, make those corrections in your drawing. So there are a lot of things, had I copied, it would not have come out to be a nice painting. So I corrected that here. And what I've done for you, I actually did it on the fly when I was doing the plein air version, where I mentally cut and pasted, but I wanted to show you the reference so that you can gather reference. This was the hotel I wanted for the background. This, of all the shots, was a shot I wanted to use, which was the front shot. And then I actually put these together for you to one piece of reference to really show you how I gave myself liberty to change this. And if you look at this hotel, you're going to be going, oh wait, she didn't do that right. That's not right. Where's that balcony? That window's not there. Absolutely right. I changed everything for the sake of the composition. You have complete freedom. And the changes I made to give this rhythm, we're going to teach you what's called melodic line. And Dave will join me for that. And we're going to give you, I think, an interesting and fun exercise at the end of the workshop for you to do so that you're going to become very aware of melodic line in your composition. And it's going to give you the freedom to collect your reference, make your decisions, and then make your creation, not your copy. We just finished talking about how the complexity of certain subjects can be intimidating, and if we don't get them right, it can spoil nice painting. So it is worth spending some time to study some of the core skills that occasionally, and I understand this, I'm the same way. I love squeezing paint out and mixing and playing with the colors. And it's a little bit hard sometimes to slow down and wait and brush up on some core skills. So if you have a little trouble in an area or you haven't studied perspective, I'm going to give you the bones of it, a few tips, technical tips throughout this workshop that you can use, but I would encourage you to just slow down, get a good book on perspective for artists and work through it just with a pencil. You stop painting for a while. You notice during the workshop part, I'm actually not painting. I'm going to be using a marker and I'm going to draw a little bit. So I would like you to take what I'm going to teach you and then go on from there. Do a spin-off, a focus study until you become very comfortable with it. And here's what the goal is, and this is what you're going to be able to do. By doing that, you won't have to then get out a straight edge and pencils and start every painting you'll be drawing perspective in the horizon line. You'll eventually get to where you so know this that when you're looking at a scene, you actually you're visualizing those perspective lines, the construction lines in your mind. And as you're translating things onto your canvas, the best way I can explain it is you almost have a little projector in your head. In other words, you look at your scene, you see those perspective lines, where they converge, where the vanishing point on the horizon line, and then you're comparing that and you're visualizing them. And you'll actually be able to catch errors in your own painting very quickly. It'll become very instinctive, but it will take that extra bit of work of your focus study of really getting good at perspective. And after you do that and understand structure and perspective and building constructions just with your pencil, your straight edge, and building out drawings that way, you'll see the correctness, you'll internalize it, and then you can speed back up and lay it down and your painting will be correct. You'll get so good at it. Unfortunately, you'll see the errors in paintings when they happen. I've actually walked into a museum or gallery and gone, oh, because you'll see something that's a tiny bit off. It'll become so part of you. So don't feel like when I'm teaching you these things that, oh my goodness, you mean I've got to like draw all this little stuff on my painting? That sounds awful. No, not at all. All right? These are like doing a few laps in pool, learning some strokes, you're learning the mechanics of it, and then you get to go out and play. I've brought out the 3 different views of this Cadillac that I photographed for you, and we want to look at them again and start to understand that this is really just a perspective problem. It gets complex when you break it down into its parts, but really it's just a simple shape. And if you can picture the vehicle, whatever it is, tractor, car, airplane, and simplify it in your mind as if it's inside a simple shape. Picture a glass box around it. And this is always your starting point, because this is how you're going to solve the perspective problem. And then once you've solved the perspective problem, you can start breaking it down to where the wheels themselves are inside blocks, etc. And then once you get it correct, using these blocks, picturing it inside a glass box, then you can start taking little bits away. So it's a process that actually starts with something very simple, and you do it step by step. Some people just tone a canvas. You'll see, you can try all kinds of things. Some people have styles, they'll tone a canvas a bright orange or something. You tone it however works for you. I like to, at the very beginning, and not much of this will survive the painting, is I'll take a very thin wash and I want to start being aware at the very get-go of where, let's see what we got, warms and cools is all I'm going to do. I said this is just killing those little, that glaring white, and instead of just picking a color and putting in an undertone, I'm using my time. In other words, I'm already using my time as I do this simple thing to already, it's making me aware. I'm going, okay, it's gonna be warm up there. And so I do that in my undertone. I just kind of identify the warms and cools. So I'll shift this a little bit. I'm actually then going to basically almost take it off with a paper towel. But I haven't wasted my mental time. I haven't gone on autopilot. Yeah, so I'm not just on autopilot with this. I'm actually sort of glancing over at my reference, and it kind of doesn't matter where my brush goes or whatever. I just go, oh, there's a little warm something over here, and this is warm. And you see I'm sort of leaving that center spot because that's where the cool of the car is going to go. And so even as I do this sort of mechanical thing I've got to do in here, I'm already tuning my brain in. It's sort of like doing a little warm-up before a race. It's making me already start thinking. Again, I'm going to wipe most of this off, but as I've just put these random strokes in and I'm glancing over, my brain is already looking at proportions, like, oh, that starts there and that kind of stops there. It's just a real efficient way. So you're warming up your eye and your brain, and then this down toward the bottom starts shifting to a little cooler, a little redder down there. So I'm just telling myself, oh, remember when you get down there, what's going to happen? That it's going to warm up a little bit. So these are just notes to self. I go, cool in the middle. I'm going to have a gradation from the top that's very, very warm. That's going to go down behind that car, and that's going to cool off there at the bottom. And sometimes you'll just see me sort of randomly dabbing or, jabbing at the canvas. And I will do that if I find myself thinking too hard and starting to like, ooh, but the car doesn't go up that high. I literally will just, this is my reminder, like, no, don't overthink this. Just make some notes to self and kill that white. So that is just all you have to do. Now I'm going to, while I wipe down my palette here, give my brush a little rinse, what I'm doing is I just want that to gas out a little bit. Let that odorless mineral spirits. Right now it's super wet, and if I touch it with the paper towel and rub it off, it's going to come straight off, back down to canvas. And I want to leave a little bit of that pigment trapped in the texture of the canvas itself. So and I would encourage you to do this. When I first started painting, you know, it's so much fun to mix the paint and have the paint, and I resented having to stop and clean my palette or wash a brush. I just wanted to keep painting. And I finally disciplined myself to where I'll stop at appropriate times. You know, if I'm mixing and really running out of room, I would try to fudge it and go, oh, I know I've got a little spot here, you know, that I can still mix something. And I'm really good now, and it took a while to get used to it. Now I don't mind it at all. It's actually kind of a breathing spot where you can just step back. I call it my housekeeping. I would encourage you to have good housekeeping duties where you always put your paints out in the same order, that you stop, clean your palette. And again, my taking this sort of soupy stuff off rather than trying to deal around it while this is gassing out, it gives me a chance to do that. In fact, while we're waiting for that to gas out, I had overlooked a couple colors over here for you that you'll see me using. And you'll also notice that I have titanium white here. We pointed that out. But I keep a pile over in the opposite corner diagonally. And I keep that right next to the one earth color. It's the only one I find I need or ever use, which is transparent oxide red. It's a very dark, transparent brown red. By using alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, and transparent oxide red, I can create any dark I want that is shifted anywhere on the color wheel, and it'll stay transparent and beautiful and have a stained glass window effect. And I keep the extra titanium over here so that if I need to mix, lighten up some darks a little bit, I can get this pile as dirty as I want. But I've always got a nice clean pile over here if I'm mixing light colors, and I need to keep those clean. If you're starting to use that same pile of titanium that you're digging into when you're mixing up some darks, you're suddenly going to look back and go, wow, why is my painting not looking fresh? And you want to have some passages that stay fresh. So now let's see if this is gassed out enough. So I'm just going to fold up a little paper towel and give it a little hit to see if when I hit it, yeah, I can leave some of that pigment behind. And the only reason I'm even doing this is because I don't want to be painting into soup. I want that just toned but kind of dry. So, and leave a little texture, you know. I know they're sort of wadded up and hit the surface just so that as you take that off, you'll see I leave a little scratch or a little something. And any little accidents that can happen along the way as you build this painting up, those will affect the upper layers and just give more interest as you go along. If I had taken and just scrubbed that off, I would have killed the white, but I missed an opportunity. And so it was an opportunity just to have, you know, a little texture here or there. I could even take my finger and do something like this, or, you know, yeah, just so you've got a base that, you know, has some interest. And then I could go back in and just go, I don't want fingerprints, but something like that. So that, they can just be meaningless marks. We've taken care of anything that later might be a white dot. And so I'm going to do my housekeeping, which I encourage you to do, and then clean up, and we're going to start in on the next stage. Okay, now the next stage we're going to go on to is what I call mapping. And I have a reason for that. We're actually going to get our subject matter and our composition drawn up. The reason I don't say I'm going to draw it is because I really don't want to make a very careful outline of everything that I then start feeling like I'm going to color it in like a coloring book, because it constrains me from getting the energy in there. And so as I show you how we map, it's more taking a brush, I just use a little small brush, holding it back here. In fact, I'll show you in the other video, we go deeply into brush handling, but I do want to at least show you how I hold my brush, because it does help keep the energy in the painting. As if you're right-handed, hold your right hand out, lay that brush across your index finger at the first knuckle right there, and then bring your thumb in, and this is where you're going to be able to control it, and then move that brush back just so that you can control it with your little finger. And then you can do all kinds of things with it, roll it and whatever, and drag it across the canvas this way, and you can get some calligraphy going. I'll occasionally change hand position. I will occasionally flip that brush up and choke up on the brush and, you know, hold it like a pencil or a crayon if I need to come in and make a little dot and I need a lot of control. But I'm very aware of then, once I've done that, then I go back and I come right back down to the end of that brush, so that I want that brush a little loose. I want some, I don't want it too controlled. You can refine things later. And also, it's just a nice way to paint. So if you haven't tried that, try it. And you'll see me flipping my hand position around. But typically, since we were taught, since we were, you know, I had our first crayon or in school, we've been laying on the floor or hunched over desks, holding a pencil or a crayon, doing this. And so, you know, I'll see, it's what we learn. So I'll see people, you know, coming up, and I call it pet the kitty, you know, holding it like a pencil or a crayon, and, you know, dab, 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 and then trying to be, you know, very thoughtful and careful. But there's just no way to get any spontaneity or energy in. So get back there on the end of that brush, and you'll see me as I'm painting through this painting. I'll very often, you'll see me lean back. If I'm in my studio where I really have room to roam, I'll step back. I'll go back 10 feet. I'll go back and forth and back and forth. You know, if I'm wearing my Fitbit, I'll have thousands of steps, because I'll do most of my thinking and planning a stroke or two out of reach of the canvas. And I'll tell you the value of that is, if I was in my studio and step back, I want to make those decisions where even if I reach my arm all the way out and I'm holding my brush at the very end, that I can't reach the canvas until I know exactly what I'm going to do. And here's the reason. I'm sure somewhere through this video I have not been aware of saying or using a little bit of filler in there, because I'm probably thinking, like, how do I want to phrase the next thing? So, you know, it's our stall tactic. And we're thinking, and then I'll go on with the sentence perhaps. If you're up here, you will not be aware of it, but you may have put down a beautiful stroke, and then the pet the kitty, touching that stroke a second time, is the painter's version of saying and that unless you're going in to refine something specific, you will overpaint perhaps something really fresh and beautiful that you've done. So try not to on your canvas. And my way of doing it is just by being out of reach of it until I want to step forward and do it. You'll see me, just for the sake that I need to be here and speaking to you while I'm painting. You'll see me in a lot closer to my painting than I normally paint. When you're practicing this or doing a paint along with me, say I just did it. You'll want to try to do what I described to you, which is step back. Now for the mapping, I've gone ahead here to save a little bit of time, and I've also, you can see that on this piece of reference that I put together to use, I have put in this photograph some lines. I don't always do that. In fact, I usually never do that, but I want to be very clear about what I'm talking about. When we were talking about perspective and seeing perspective lines going off to a vanishing point, I told you that eventually you're going to be able to see those in your mind, kind of project them. And that's what's going to happen here, is that once I have made a few marks over here, I will see this envelope for the car. And I've got it in my mind, and I can judge those distances. But the one thing I do is take a little bit of odorless mineral spirits, and I'll mix myself up just a real neutral. Take a little bit of my ultramarine blue and my oxide red just to get myself sort of a soupy gray there. And especially with something complex like a vehicle, I will do a little more measuring. I'll be a little bit more careful, or I can be in danger if I really have a proportion wrong of getting way into this painting and realize that, oh, I just have all of a sudden this vehicle has gotten like really tall. It just can happen. And by creating these proportions, taking a few measurements with your brush ahead of time, you're going to avoid that, because I actually had a case where I was painting an old truck, and I was really pleased. It was coming along to be a nice painting, and I had not taken enough care, and somewhere I had gotten my proportions off, and it spoiled a nice painting. I was able to go in and correct it at a later time, but then it didn't have the same freshness. So I've learned to slow it down a little bit. So we're going to be doing we're going to take a little bit more care and take a few more measurements than I may on other subjects, buildings, landscapes, etc. So the most important things, and I've done this for you so you can see exactly what I'm talking about, and I've also gone ahead and transferred this envelope onto the canvas so that you can understand exactly what I'm doing. And you may have done this, when you're in elementary school or something, they'll give you a grid. They'll say, here's a photo of a vase, and they show you how to make a grid over it, and then you transfer it. And all that happens is when you have something complex, if you can give yourself something for it to be relative to, you can judge these shapes, these negative shapes, a little bit better. When I'm actually mapping something like this in, here's another trick too, is I'll be making these marks. When you see me make these map marks, which are simply, I'm going to put in waypoints and directions and little lines rather than trying to like draw in the outline of this car. And this has become a habit with me. Try this. When you do it, is draw in these negative shapes. In other words, when I want to lay this part of the map in, that little spot, I'm looking at this. I'm not trying to do the car. And it's a very simple mind thing. Once you name something, car, tree, building, you have a set of symbols in your brain that kicks in, and it's just much harder to get a true location because you're fighting these, Christmas tree symbol or whatever, where if you are painting the negative shape, you just don't have that battle to fight, and you're not getting drawn off. So just make that a habit. Map in by looking at the negative shapes, not the thing that has a name. and you'll be a little more accurate. So I've got my little soup here, and the first thing and most important thing, which I've already put on with pencil so you can see it, because I want you to be able to correlate the two. I would not normally have those marks on there, but I want you to look back and forth and go, oh, okay, I've got it. My most important things are to make, I need the center line right there. I need to identify that, top and bottom. And if you're not used to judging distances, then feel free to measure out what that center point is at first to get it right. But what you want to do over time is get to where you can absolutely eyeball that, where you can bang in those center marks. And then if you go back and measure them for fun to see how you did, that you are spot on. What drawing is really, people go, I had someone say, I just want to paint. I don't want to learn to draw. That doesn't sound fun. It'd take too much time. I'm like, I think they had a misconception of what drawing was. Like, I will have to spend 5 years copying plaster casts or something. What drawing is based on is the brain's ability to measure distances, angles, and relationships. That's all. If you can train your brain to do that so that you can squint and eyeball that center point and go bang and get it right every time, and then you can get an angle correct and its relative distance, then you're on your way. But it takes a little bit of training. And so make the effort to do it. A good way to do it is to squint or do the fuzzy one eye, which is where you close one eye and just take something out of focus. In other words, so that you're aware. Let's say you're trying to hit this center point here. You want your brain to be aware of this whole space from here to here, not really focused in anywhere on it. And when your brain can see that, so you're just staring at it. It's the only way I can describe it, really. Focusing in on nothing, but aware of the whole thing. That's when you'll be able to see right in there where that center point is, that this is equal to this, and then you reach up and go, boom. Worth the time. Make it a game. In other words, try it, measure it, see how you're doing until you can get it exact. Once you do that and get those 4 points, then you can visualize. In other words, and this is again brain training. I've drawn the line in here for you, but you will glance up here, here. You'll visualize in your mind that line dropping down, see where this line goes. And then if you, again, become aware of your 2 center lines here, you're going to see in your mind exactly where this center point, and I'll just make a little blob there. And what this does for me is I now have, if we take this line, which is this, I have the center point, I have these 4. And for most paintings, that's plenty. That works. That gives me enough, it breaks it down far enough where it's easier relatively to get what I need placed correctly in there, so I don't spoil the composition that I'd worked on. However, I told you, I learned, as much as I have painted and drawn, when I realized that I had somehow missed the proportions and gotten this truck much taller and less wide than it needed to be, I realized that I'm going to take a little more care. And when you have something that's difficult proportion-wise, then what you want to do is you want to create this envelope. Remember we talked about putting a vehicle inside the glass box, all right? We've picked a simple front-on one-point perspective for this, so we're just seeing the front of the glass box. But if we can identify what this envelope is, the edges of this see-through box the truck is in, and get that over, and spend the time. It's like it's worth. Spend as much time as you need. And if at the beginning you actually need to make some measurements, get this right. Because you have to, if you get one thing right on your painting, and it's exactly right, then you have something correct for everything else to be relative to. So it's worth slowing down a little bit. If you're a little impatient and you get that thing off or incorrect, then everything you're doing after that is relative to something that's off, and it will be off. And it'll actually just get worse and worse and worse. So I've got my center marks and my center marks of the canvas, and then normally I would make a little measurement there for where my glass box is going to intersect. And if you need to get that right, go ahead and it's nice to be able to do everything on the fly, and you will be able to outdoors, but get a ruler out. You know, tools are tools. Don't ever use a tool as a crutch or to keep you from progressing. But sometimes I'll take a ruler, I'll measure, I'll go, wow, exactly what is that? And I'll measure it, and I'll make the mark. If you start like all of a sudden starting measuring little things and stuff, then you're going to fall down a hole and it's going to get tight and icky. But, and then I'm just mixing up something neutral here, and I'll sometimes not even draw the whole. I've actually taken a pencil and drawn that glass box for you. But if I was in my studio painting, I would just maybe do that on the corners, because that's enough for me having these marks. Then to see that box, I can see that line comes over and I have something relative to. So that's about as far as I would go. But it's a lot more information. It's very specific and gives me the marks I need relative to the map. Now, what I would do is, like I said, I just want to identify some angles. Remember I said angles, waypoints, and not drawing. So I go map, you know, X marks the spot. Here's where the treasure is, and if you were hiking and there's a dotted line to the treasure, this is all you're doing is little map marks to get you pointed in the right direction. Hi, I'm Lyn Boyer. Welcome to my workshop. I put this together because I've had the experience of personally loving all kinds of vehicles. And I love to paint cars. They suggest story to me. They're, to me, beautiful pieces of art. And then I would run into painters who said, you know, Lyn, I saw this beautiful truck and I really wanted to paint it. And honestly, it scared me. And I thought, you know, I think I can help you with that. And now I'm here to try to help more of you and hope to make you feel very comfortable if you run across a tractor and a barn or automobiles. If that's going to enhance your painting or give you something new and interesting to do, I want you to have that choice and feel free to do it. And it really is not complicated. I'm going to give you tools. We're going to break it down. You'll practice them, and if you want, be able to do a paint along with a painting of the beautiful Cadillac that I'm going to demo for you. And hopefully we're going to expand your vocabulary and give you more freedom to choose what you want to paint when you want to paint it. I also have my friend Dave Curley from Ireland with me because we're going to do something very unique that we believe is also going to help you bring your composition skills up a notch. We're going to use music and sound to demonstrate the same principles that we use in composition, whether it's musically or visually, and bring those two together. And what that does for you is you're using another sense, so that if your sense of sight has gotten dull and you're falling into defaults, we're going to kick you out of that by giving you some music to hear your composition that you're drawing. That'll make sense when you see it. It's very fun, and we believe will actually help you with your skill set. So get ready, come along, and join Dave and I on this musical and artistic journey. I'm really happy to be here with my friend Dave Curley. I'm a painter, Dave's a musician, and we met a number of years ago at a music festival that I help organize. And we got to talking and found a common interest that we had, and thought that perhaps we could collaborate and bring our two worlds together, and found a very common language that we wanted to then bring to you.
Yeah, I think we both jumped off at the idea that music and art could come together to create another, I suppose, angle in what we both do. And for me, it's been a way to create new things. You keep proposing art projects that you've got in mind, and then I respond with it musically, and we kind of come up with something new. So that's, for me, it's been a totally new avenue or conduit for me to create music. Yeah. And
it's really inspired me too. I have a love for music, but not the ability, and have found music really inspiring. And so after so many years as a painter, what I found is your music and our collaborations helps bring some new twists and some real excitement back to my own art making, that I can bring the two together. Actually, the paintings I've done of you and our projects together, and then it seems like we start chatting and come up with some other idea of how to do this. And so, you know, through careers, at least through mine, I'll kind of get to the end of something where I've explored what I want to explore. And this has been wonderful in the sense that it's just a whole new area of inspiration, and also it's so nice to just go respond to what you're doing. In other words, you'll be doing music, and it gives a feeling and emotion that I can then carry with me to put into a painting, rather than slogging through solving a technical problem. So truly, just the experience of your music helps me it affects the paintings. It helps me pour that emotion and try to emulate that in paint.
Yeah, for me, one of the big features of how you speak about your art and what I see when I look at it is that you're very story driven, and the music that I grew up listening to and that I perform and compose, stories are the main focus of all of that. So for me, again, it is a very natural connection to try and look at a piece of art and then respond with a story that jumps out from that. So for the song, for this particular painting, that's what needed to be the main focus and driver behind it, was to try and find a narrative and a storyline that spoke to me from looking at the car itself and your work on it.
That's always really exciting for me, because I love just being able to trust you completely. In other words, and this one was interesting because it's a car. you know. And again, I'm attracted to your music because has a narrative, the songs you write, very story-driven. My background before becoming a fine art oil painter was in fact an editorial illustrator, which is story narrating, visual story narration. And so on our first video, you had lyrics that had been waiting to find their place that had sort of a natural fit to a painting I had already done. So it came together very naturally.
Yeah.
And so this time when I knew I was, Motor City car girl who grew up in Detroit, and I was like, Dave, I'm gonna paint this car. Are you on board? I was kind of excited because I knew it was like, I don't know what I would have done were you. And so I didn't, while I was developing the course work for this, I never art direct you. I don't want to. I just know that you're going to bring what you did, but I was also like, boy, this is going to be really interesting. And when I heard it, when you presented it to me, I was wowed. I was thrilled. It felt so perfect and so natural and so emotive. And without you knowing it, because I've talked a little bit about my background growing up with cars. You know, I was daughter of an automotive designer, so cars have been part of my life, but not a lot. So it was really up to you to find your way to what you did. And it was uncanny how weirdly it just reached down, and if someone had said, Lyn, tell Dave everything you want in this song, you hit every bullet point just intuitively. It's really cool.
Well, that's good, yeah. It was definitely outside of my wheelhouse, particularly in the language set. Originally, when I was trying to think about, like, most of the songs we write are, you know, the old traditional songs, like personify Ireland and kind of displacement from the homeland, but looking at a painting of a car just felt like I was in a whole different territory of what I needed to talk about. So it took me a while to land on where I wanted it to be, but yeah, so definitely a lot more of a challenge. And I think even musically, what I ended up with was something a little bit outside of my typical go-to. When I heard you talking about some of the techniques you're using, about not getting caught up in the same repetitive kind of inclinations all the time, that this song for me really pushed me out into a new territory, sonically, lyrically, and melodically. All parts of it were just like I had to draw on something new. So yeah, I think in the end it came together.
The thing that I value most about our having met and our collaborations are that I know that I'm able to create things that I absolutely wouldn't have just working in isolation. And it can be a very isolated, focused life. I'm doing things I wouldn't have done. That's of great value.
Yeah, I see that all the time with music. We more often are working with other musicians, and you find that you work with one musician, a certain kind of sound and mood and vibe will come out, and then you work with 2 or 3 musicians in another setting, and even though you've got a lot of similar backgrounds and interests, each one kind of creates its own little sound.
Yeah.
And even when we talked about the melodic lines and the exercise that we were coming up with, watching you go through that, about how many little choices that can be very purposeful but also very free, you can end up with a very different structure on the canvas. And it's the same thing with musically, that just one little suggestion, a little change, a little colour that's different in the music creates this whole new canvas to work with on the song. So going through that exercise, it made perfect sense watching you draw out those lines and stagger the intervals and create new shapes. All of that stuff relates to me in terms of how I think about music and what collaboration does on the music end of things. So it's interesting for me to see that just so visually on a canvas as well.
You know, I had the feeling and an inclination that our 2 worlds were so similar, just because there's such common even language between the 2 worlds. But not being a musician, it was like my guess, like, boy, I think these are pretty parallel. But the more that we work together, the more I see they are literally, probably even on the level of physics. It's like the same information, the same constructions, built on the same foundations, but our brains are just processing them, one auditorially, through our ears, sound, music, and the other through vision. And so it's actually, they're much more attached at the hip than I even suspected at the very beginning. And that's why I'm excited about this exercise that we developed. And I hope the folks, as they watch it and have the fun of doing it, are probably never going to be able to forget it. I think we've created for them a musical visual earworm that every time they're out painting, they're going to be singing the mountain, but it'll be good.
Yeah, it is amazing how many similarities. One thing that you have pointed out to me that, music obviously happens over time. If it's a 4-minute song, you develop the story, you develop the sounds, and the palette kind of grows and gets smaller in different spots to try and keep things interesting and fresh to the listener all the way through. And I remember describing a painting, you see it all at once, and then you started talking about how there are actually leading lines going through. The painter wants to show you a point on the canvas first and then make you work your way through, and it opens out, has more depth that way. And so that was something I suppose I probably did when I would look at a painting. I would look at different points, but I wasn't thinking about that there is actually a pattern and it's moving you through the painting in a particular way. And again, that's what we try to do musically. The engineer I work with, he always describes it as ear candy, little nuggets along the way that just keep it fresh as you go through, changes it up, and keeps things interesting for you as a listener. And you do the same thing with your art.
In fact, when you give me music lessons, since I found this to be fascinating, and so I said, I'd like to learn these concepts and make an effort, so you give me my music lessons. And I'm noticing it's actually helping me become a better instructor in the sense that I'm experiencing the very things I'm trying to teach. In other words, you showed me an ornament, and then I became aware as I did my homework before the next lesson. I go, wow, I'm doing exactly what my beginner students do when I show them a new brushstroke. And it's everywhere on the canvas, Yeah. And it's just like if you eat too much candy, you get a tummy ache.
Yeah.
And so it was like, so as I do this and I'm falling into these things, I go, oh, I just did that musically. And the parallels are very cool. So actually my beginner, it's humbling, but cool to put myself back into an environment where I am a student. And it reminds me to not assume my students know something, or reminds me that, oh, I just did that, so I can help them avoid that little trap. So that actually is another really nice thing about us meeting that I like is we've been able to share each other's worlds a little bit, and it's expanding just my world, my bits of knowledge, musically, and helping me in my painting, and helping me as an instructor.
Yeah, fantastic, yeah.
Yeah. But you have not yet signed up for my painting classes, and I'm befuddled.
Definitely not visually inclined in terms of an ability, but I do appreciate it all. But yeah, the parallels are like non-stop, and as you said, a lot of the language set, even though it might be applied slightly differently, they draw on the same things constantly. So So you've mentioned a little bit about your connection growing up with cars, but I don't really know the full story. I know you've got a lot of family connections and you grew up in Detroit, but do you want to speak to a little bit where this interest came in painting vehicles?
Absolutely, and this isn't random. It basically runs in my veins. I grew up the daughter of an automotive designer at Ford Motor Company, grew up in Detroit, and so from my earliest memory, there was Dad driving up the driveway in some new experimental car model he was bringing home for the weekend, and I'd be following him around, fixing things and changing the oil on motorcycles. So it's just, my main experience was vehicles. And so much so that when I got 2 Christmas presents, a big red fire truck that I could hook up to the hose, you know, that had wheels and steel, and you know, and I could roll it. And then someone tried to give me a doll. Well, the doll ended up in the bottom of the closet, but I still remember that fire truck. And anything, boats, I got a boat. I said, get me a boat, get me cars, and model cars, putting tape on the floor. My pop would make roads out of tape, and I'd run the model cars around. So it's all I wanted. I actually almost became an automotive designer. It was, you know, I just went, this is going to be wonderful. And it was a little bit towards the end. My father was in the era where they were still designing pieces of art, and one man could design a car, you know, or just about, you know, a small team. So it was very creative. And the industry was just tipping more into a very technical industry where you had to design within a lot of rules. So I thought maybe I would be late to the game and not be able to do the things I wanted. So I would go to car races, and for a summer project in high school, I think probably my pop, to like keep me off the streets and out of trouble, comes home with these giant boxes, you know, shoves them into the driveway and dumps out all this rubble and says, here is a car, put it together. And so I spent all summer going to junkyards to get the parts that were missing, and he'd come out and help me put this thing together. And by the end of the summer, there was this car appeared out of this rubble. It was great fun. And it didn't run very well at all.
Looked the part, I'm sure. Yeah.
It looked very cool. Stripes, you know, and anything I could do to be part of the car world was just something I loved to do. And so when that part of my life, I moved on and had my own professional career, and couldn't find a way to become a race car driver or a mechanic or something I really wanted to do. It wasn't conscious, but as I've always been one to not stop to paint something unless it touched my heart, unless I loved it. And so there's something that drew me to it.
So with this car, what in particular stood out for you when you saw this car?
Oh, this particular Cadillac, this old 1937 Cadillac, I was up doing a plein air event at this hotel and had never been there, and they rolled this car out. And this often happens to me. You know, there's 47 people down by the beautiful pond with the swans and the cattails, you know, all painting there. And I was going to say almost all the time, I am all the time somewhere else, painting an old piece of junk I found or whatever, that just, it's not conscious. So everyone was headed down to the pretty things, and I see out of the corner of my eye, they bring out this Cadillac that I spoke of it when I was doing the workshop part, that this era is steel art. At the beginning, they didn't have the technology available to stamp steel. It was very constructed, the Model Ts, and they were all very square. And then they developed technology where they could stamp these, were physically capable of doing these beautiful things. I just looked over and I went, oh my gosh, this is not only my favorite era of design, whether it's trains, planes, whatever, buildings, it was just, people were living in a world of art. Toasters were art, you know, literally. Yeah. Everything that touched your life was art. And I think part of it had to do, too, with being there was an era where post-World War I, I think as people recovered, they wanted beauty, you know, so everything became beautiful. And so there was no, you know, it's like throwing a piece of meat in front of a very hungry dog. You roll something like this out, and I didn't even have to think. I was just like, oh, yeah. And that when I decided to do, for us to do this video on vehicles, it was very driven by people asking for it. You know, just saying, I'd love to paint cars and planes, and they just scare me to death, and I don't even know where to begin. And I thought, oh, this would be great fun, and if we can free people up to do that. And so in choosing a vehicle, I circled back to this plein air painting, and I was also within driving distance, you know, day's drive, that I could go back there and revisit it. And the gallery, art gallery there, and the hotel and museum were very gracious. I told them what we were doing and said, we'd like to use your beautiful 1937 Caddy. And they were gracious and rolled it out, and I was able to get more photos for the folks. And it was though I love painting rusty old cars and things, I thought the thing that befuddles people a bit is sometimes shiny surfaces, chrome, things like that. And so I thought this was the great, you know, I just happened to stumble what for us would have been the perfect lesson for them in this vehicle. My goal is to paint my paintings so that they function like your songs. In other words, that I once was standing in my studio trying to get a painting so that a person would experience feelings and actually draw this out and keep them in long enough so that they would experience it just the way they experience one of your songs, and then have a satisfying conclusion. And I remember almost, in fact, I think it was when you and your trio came and played, and I remember watching you guys and going, almost being a little jealous in a strange way, because I went, they have their instruments, their voices, there's lighting, there's sound. In other words, all of these senses that you have to communicate with when you're presenting your art. And I remember after y'all left, I was in my studio painting, feeling almost handicapped, like a deaf mute. In other words, I was standing there with my brush going, I want to communicate that powerfully, and I have one thing to do it with, and only one two-dimensional surface, and I'm communicating to one of their senses, their sight. That's it. So, you know, I was like, how can I, and so I've been working on that since, like, how can I emulate in paint, in brush strokes, in composition? That's why we taught melodic line. How can we not be that painter's deaf mute with that, you know, one note? How can I use the brush? How can my students use the brush and the color to emulate all those other senses, whether it's bright color or speed of a brush or scratches or something? And you know, I'll be working on that till long after I'm dead, you know. But it inspired me to start bringing new things to my paintings. Hi, I'm Lyn Boyer. Welcome to my workshop. I put this together because I've had the experience of personally loving all kinds of vehicles. And I love to paint cars. They suggest story to me. They're, to me, beautiful pieces of art. And then I would run into painters who said, you know, Lyn, I saw this beautiful truck and I really wanted to paint it. And honestly, it scared me. And I thought, you know, I think I can help you with that. and now I'm here to try to help more of you and hope to make you feel very comfortable if you run across a tractor and a barn or automobiles. If that's going to enhance your painting or give you something new and interesting to do, I want you to have that choice and feel free to do it. And it really is not complicated. I'm going to give you tools. We're going to break it down. You'll practice them, and if you want, be able to do a paint along with the painting of the beautiful Cadillac that I'm going to demo for you. And hopefully we're going to expand your vocabulary and give you more freedom to choose what you want to paint when you want to paint it. I also have my friend Dave Curley from Ireland with me because we're going to do something very unique that we believe is also going to help you bring your composition skills up a notch. We're going to use music and sound to demonstrate the same principles that we use in composition, whether it's musically or visually, and bring those two together. And what that does for you is you're using another sense, so that if your sense of sight has gotten dull and you're falling into defaults, we're going to kick you out of that by giving you some music to hear your composition that you're drawing. That'll make sense when you see it. It's very fun, and we believe will actually help you with your skill set. So get ready, come along, and join Dave and I on this musical and artistic journey. Hi, I'm Lyn Boyer. Welcome to my workshop. I put this together because I've had the experience of personally loving all kinds of vehicles. And I love to paint cars. They suggest story to me. They're, to me, beautiful pieces of art. And then I would run into painters who said, you know, Lyn, I saw this beautiful truck and I really wanted to paint it. And honestly, it scared me. And I thought, you know, I think I can help you with that. And now I'm here to try to help more of you and hope to make you feel very comfortable if you run across a tractor and a barn or automobiles. If that's going to enhance your painting or give you something new and interesting to do, I want you to have that choice and feel free to do it. And it really is not complicated. I'm going to give you tools. We're going to break it down. You'll practice them, and if you want, be able to do a paint along with the painting of the beautiful Cadillac that I'm going to demo for you. And hopefully we're going to expand your vocabulary and give you more freedom to choose what you want to paint when you want to paint it. I also have my friend Dave Curley from Ireland with me because we're going to do something very unique that we believe is also going to help you bring your composition skills up a notch. We're going to use music and sound to demonstrate the same principles that we use in composition, whether it's musically or visually, and bring those two together. And what that does for you is you're using another sense, so that if your sense of sight has gotten dull and you're falling into defaults, we're going to kick you out of that by giving you some music to hear your composition that you're drawing. That'll make sense when you see it. It's very fun, and we believe will actually help you with your skill set. So get ready, come along, and join Dave and I on this musical and artistic journey.